Welcome, Sophie.
Thank you so much, MacKenzie. I'm so happy to be with you. I'm sorry my voice is not cooperative, but we're gonna get it done.
Yeah, you've been on the vocal rest, pulling
Yeah,
yourself out for just this one.
I know. I've got my cough drops. I'm good to go. Good to go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I so appreciate you coming on. I was telling you before we started recording, I have wanted to interview for years. I just adore you. I adore
So kind.
Melanie. There were literally, so just a little backstory on me. So
Okay.
I was in an abusive marriage for many years and walked
I'm
away
so
seven.
sorry.
Thank you. But I walked away 7 years ago and was able to get free of that with my kids and for the most part and all of that. And I was listening because I lived with my parents for like 2 years, basically, as we were trying to get on our feet. And I was listening to one of your books, maybe multiple books, actually. And I just remember like because there was no place to we were living on the living room floor. There
Right.
was no place to go to. And so I would just put in my headphones and I would listen to audiobooks. And I remember actually like pausing and rewinding and going and showing my parents like you have to listen to this is the
Oh,
funniest thing. And so they were just like these little lifelines that I really remember from that time, and you were a big part of that.
well, that's
So
that's so kind. Listen, I'm honored that you would one listen and that it would be, maybe a little encouraging. That's so sweet.
oh, it absolutely was. And so when I got this new book, my only like was I didn't get to listen to you because I always like to
Right.
listen to your stuff, but I've listened to you so much between the podcast and the audiobooks. I could hear your voice in my head the whole time. I was like, I know how she would say this. So that was a benefit.
Well, it's coming. I don't know when
Yeah.
it'll be out, but it's on the way.
Yeah.
At some point it'll
It's
it'll
always a
be
process.
around.
Yeah. I'm sure they'll probably have it done right around the time that the book is coming out. So,
Hopefully so.
yeah.
Yes. That would be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I love this new book. There's a lot I want to hit on before we get there, though,
Okay, perfect.
because, like I said, obviously, big fan of you and Melanie. I have said for a while now, if anybody needs a sports show, it's the two of you because I don't even like sports. Like, I don't play them. I'm a musical theater girl. I don't particularly enjoy watching them. But because I listen to the podcast with my boyfriend, I'm able to like throw out like some random sports fact every once in a while.
Well
And
done. Listen,
I
that's all we could ask. That's all
it's
we could
because
ask.
of you. I think that like what Taylor Swift did for the NFL,
Oh, this is a strong comparison,
I
Mackenzie.
no, I realize that. But I think there's this whole untapped market of
Yeah.
women who would actually be interested if they were listening to the two of you.
Well, thank you. I saw a tweet earlier this week. It was a man had tweeted it and said something like, important for all the women in my life to know that starting this Thursday night, I'm in college football mode. And I thought, hold on a minute. Like there are women who are going into college football mode too. I'm one of
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
and can't wait for it. But now you said you're a musical theater nerd. What's your very favorite musical?
Oh, that's really, really hard to
I know
say.
it's like picking a favorite child,
Yeah.
but if you had, I mean, if there's just one, maybe it's not even your favorite, it's just the one that you hold kind of the closest in your heart.
Yeah. I mean, love Hamilton, of course, all of
Mm-hmm.
that. But the one that I saw from a young age and I've seen multiple times and love is Phantom of the Opera.
Okay.
There's just
Okay.
something about that chandelier and like the
Right.
whole
Yeah.
thing that yeah, I love Phantom.
Yeah. Yeah. We're fans in this house of that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And our son kind of unexpectedly got into that after he had played football for a really long time. He was like, I want to try out for a musical. And it was the most fun.
Yeah.
Just such a blast for our family. And so we love it a lot.
Yeah, there's just something to the people and the freedom to just be a goofball and put yourself out
Yes.
there. And
Yes. And the creativity and
yeah,
like the whole thing is magic to me.
yeah, yeah. I was telling even my boyfriend's son, we went to his school conference this morning, and he's in fifth grade, but they're going to bring in a musical theater program at his school. And I was like,
Oh,
you have to do it because like that was the thing for me growing up. Like I was a fine student. It was okay. But when I started doing musical theater, it was like a switch flipped. And I
Yeah.
suddenly was myself and I was learning how to memorize things and that helped me in school. And like there were so
Yes.
many things I feel like I've even carried over into being an interviewer on my podcast that were skills I learned from doing theater that I think they're invaluable just for even doing like interviews for jobs. If you're
Absolutely.
able to have those like improv skills and all that kind of thing, I think it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, just the practice of getting up in front of people like
Mm-hmm.
is huge.
Yeah,
So
being
it's
able to
great.
kind of get past yourself and
Hmm.
all of that. But yeah, I think that you and Melanie, obviously, you're great speakers and all of that. But you've been to media days.
Yes,
They
we
need to
have.
sign the show. They need to do
Well,
it.
nobody has informed anybody of anything along those lines, but we do love it and we have the
Yeah,
most fun talking about it. And it's really been a fun place for us just to bond, in real life.
yeah.
And then to have content around it is the best.
Yeah, it's so fun to be able to like I mean the format even of your guys' podcast is so, carefree and everything, but I would have never thought that I would sit there and listen through 20 to 30 minutes of like updates on sports and I'm here for it. Like even
Sometimes we
listening.
get yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say sometimes we get a little carried away, and we have to remember like everybody doesn't want to talk about this the whole time, but we could talk
Yes.
about it the whole time for
Yeah.
sure.
But I found myself like dedicated enough that when whatever drama was happening, where you guys then went and did a Patreon episode about it, I was
Yes,
like,
yes,
well, I need to know. I need to
sure,
know like the
yeah.
the
Listen,
backstory and everything.
absolutely, yeah. A&M's coach left for the
Yeah.
rival team. We had to talk about it.
Yeah. And so I even though like my interest in sports is very minimal, I so enjoy it. So well
Well,
done.
thank you, thank
Yes,
you.
well done. Okay. So, the book. There are so
Yes.
many offshoots about this book that we're going to get into
Oh, good.
because, well, first and foremost, I don't think it actually made its way into the book, but I heard you talking about it on the podcast, and that is unreasonable hospitality.
Oh my goodness. Listen, it. I I could be I could do an infomercial for that book. Now, nobody
Right.
would ever ask me to, but I would absolutely do an infomercial for that
Yeah.
book. And I think the closest I got to it in this book was when I talked about Richie in the
Which
bear.
I also have in my notes.
Yes, because
Yes.
he stands and he reads Unreasonable Hospitality. That's
Yes.
how I saw it. I didn't know what it was, and then a
Yep.
friend of mine mentioned that they were reading. Like she's a school principal, and they were reading it in her school district. And so I love that book so much, and I think that book, I can be a little bit of an eternal optimist in an annoying way. Like I just really do believe in the end, like everything's going to work out and everything's going to be fine. Um, but that book to me is like the best explanation of why our kindness to one another matters so much and our
Yeah.
thoughtfulness. And it's really, the new book is all about this idea of seeing and how seeing impacts our leadership. And really, in so many ways, so is unreasonable hospitality. It's
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
how they made a point to notice. And as
Hmm.
they would notice things, they were able to make a difference in people's lives. I think it's extraordinary. I think it's what the church should look like. I think it's what life for believers should look like. I think it's remarkable and I love it so
Hmm.
much. And I talk about it whenever I get a chance. I
Yeah.
think it's amazing.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way on it. I feel like almost every guest I have on the podcast, I end up bringing it around to, have you read Unreasonable Hospitality? I was like
So
telling
good.
our ballet studio, and they're like, well, if it's about like the food industry, I was like, no, it can be applied to
Yeah,
anything. I
to
want my
anything.
kids to listen to it. I have a senior in high school this year, and he's going to be heading off into the world. And like, I'm like, everybody needs this book. This whole because we were even watching clips specifically from that episode of The Bear for
Yes.
and how they went and got the pizza and they like dolled it up for the people and everything. And some of our kids were in the room and they were like, do you think that really happens? I was like, no, I've read the book. This really happens. There
This
are
really
actual
happened.
restaurants that do this
Yes.
thing. And what a feeling, like what an honor to be seen in that
Right.
way, which obviously is a huge theme throughout this book. It's called A Fine Sight to See because
Yes.
that seeing is so much of the time what then is able to prompt you to action.
Right. How we see healthy sight leads to healthy leadership. And uh yeah, I think that, I don't know Will Gadara who wrote Unreasonable Hospitality, but there've been a couple of things I've read lately where there's like a tiny overlap in terms of um what a book I've read is talking about and this new book of mine. And I think I wish we could all get around a table because somehow people have been thinking about similar things. I don't know. I
Mm-hmm.
think that book, anybody who deals with people in the day to
Yeah.
day, I just think, man, you got to give yourself the gift of reading that.
Yeah,
I really do.
absolutely. And take your notes and and really
Yes.
dig in there. But in a lot of ways, I felt the same way about your book. I've
Oh,
already
thanks.
been messaging people about it. There were certain things that like there's another author who I had on the show who wrote something and really one part of it resonated with one part of your book. I was like, you got to pre-order this now.
Oh,
I went in and I looked because I read it on my Kindle and I have 58 highlighted quotes
that
from your
makes me
book.
so happy. I'm also a highlighter when I read. My treasure after I read a book is then to go back and to look
Yeah.
and see all the things that I highlighted. So 58. Thank
Yes,
you.
it could have been more. And some of it, I was going through it, like trying to distill down, what I wanted to talk about today. And some of it was just like great stuff. But then some of it I would highlight just because you're funny.
Oh,
It's like,
thanks.
oh, that was
Listen,
a great title, or like whatever random thing I really applaud you for.
thank you. There were times I felt weird because I was like, in what world did I ever think I would write a book? One that centers on Exodus, two
Yeah.
that's so obsessed with Moses, and that three, I wanted it to be funny. And
Yeah.
when I was writing it, I would tell people, I know this sounds weird. I understand this sounds really strange, but I'm writing about Exodus and Moses, and I'm trying to tell funny stories. So I don't know,
Yeah.
it is what it is.
I relate to that because I've been working on a book proposal for, I don't know, a bazillion years now. But I'm like, yeah, it's about like coming out of a difficult marriage and like restarting your life over, but it's funny.
Right.
I
I
promise.
know. I promise.
Yeah.
Got some light moments in it.
Yeah. I really appreciated like your whole journey through the Pharaohity and Pharaohy
Yes.
and
Pharaoh
ferocity.
ferocity. I
Yeah.
know. When I was reading the audiobook, I got hung up on all those words as I would
Yeah.
read. I was like, what was I even thinking to try to do this? But
Yeah. Like, how is this
yeah,
actually pronounced when I
right,
have to
right.
actually
It made
say it?
more sense when I was typing it.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
love that.
I'll tell you, it was that process because you can go into Exodus and you can be like, well, Pharaoh's the worst, and I think that's the thing about scripture though, is like the more I read, I was like, oh yeah, I can also be the worst.
Yeah.
And I see some of this in me. And there are times in my life where I have absolutely responded like by stomping my foot and saying, like, no, I don't care. I'm doing what I
Yeah.
want to do.
Yeah.
And so it was I love the chance to get that deep into scripture where like everybody starts to walk around your head a little bit, as
Hmm.
crazy as that sounds. And I didn't anticipate that Exodus would be that kind of experience, but it
Yeah.
absolutely was.
Yeah. It made me want to go back and like dig into some Old Testament stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so much character there of the people and what they went through that you can, if you really just camp out there for a little while, can
Yeah,
really
and
pull out a lot.
nothing new under the sun, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of just humanity and our tendencies to forget, and then how much better we feel when we remember all the stuff God's done. And then listen, we
Hmm.
may go 5 minutes and forget again. Like
Yeah.
it really now the back half of Exodus did not reside in my head as much because it's a lot of measurements and
Yeah.
a lot of procedures. But those first 20 chapters are really like just a relational I don't know. It's there's just so much there. It's
Hmm.
just is really unbelievable. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess that's sort of how the Bible works, but
But
it's
I love,
it's
well,
great.
yeah, how you brought it then into specifically for women too, without getting like in the weeds about what people think about roles and, all of that. I thought you did a really good job of delineating between the two.
Thank
But
you.
then focusing on like there are so many different ways that we can be in leadership as
Right.
women, and we should be. And really like getting into some of those points about like shame and
Yeah.
how, I mean, that we let shame get in the way of how we can step into these roles so much of the time. You had great quotes about it, that shame and regret tend to boss us around and hold us back from stepping up as leaders in our spheres of influence. Like,
Yeah.
even in the smallest of ways, I think that can hold us back.
Yeah. When I was writing the book and I had dinner with a friend who was really wrestling with some stuff, and I just thought, one thing we do as women, and I didn't want to argue about what women can and can't do. Like,
Yeah.
I'm so tired of the arguing. And so before I started to write, I was like, here's where I have to land. Like, listen, if what you believe in terms of women's roles, if it's rooted and grounded in love, like, go for it, walk it out.
Hmm. Yeah.
If that means it's more restricted by your denomination, okay. If it's wider open because of your denomination or your personal beliefs, okay. Like, I didn't want to have to make a case,
Yeah.
because I don't think it's necessary to make a case for why women get to walk in the fullness of the gifts they've been given.
Hmm.
And so it was really, it was humbling in a way, and it also made me really reflective, because I do think women have a knack, and
Hmm.
maybe men do too, and maybe they just don't talk about it as much. But the number of conversations I've had with friends of mine about shame, and about how, we can hold on to something from 10, 15, 20 years ago,
Hmm.
and maybe even a situation where we were harmed in some way, or um would be considered the victims in that situation, and we continue to vilify and villainize ourselves and our role in that. And
Hmm.
so that's a whole piece that will keep us from stepping into whatever it is that we're meant to do in terms of leadership. But I think, to see that in Moses, 40 years in Midian, 40
Yeah.
years, and granted, he did kill someone, so
Yeah.
I don't want to minimize that, but 40 years, God used every bit of it and purposed every bit of it. But I don't know. I would love to see more of us make our peace with that stuff, and
Hmm.
and kind of get going.
Yeah. And still be able to be used and show up and not let
Yeah,
that get in our way.
yeah, and I think also that particular place likely brings some vulnerability, and brings some
Hmm.
relatability,
Yeah.
and brings some credibility, as you are doing whatever it is that you're made to do, because it gives you sympathy, it gives you empathy, it makes you
Hmm.
compassionate. Like, I don't know many people who think, I'm leading because I'm perfect. I'm leading because I have it all together. If they
Yeah.
do, maybe there's a little bit of an overconfidence issue,
Yeah.
uh, a smidge of narcissism, because I think most people, there was a book several years ago called Leading with a Limp, and my boss Sean used to talk about it all the time. But I think most of us do lead with a limp, and I
Hmm.
think it probably makes us more effective.
Yeah. Well, and I really related to what you were saying about like that kind of having that maybe overconfidence when you're younger,
Oh,
and
for sure.
yeah, having those things that you're shameful about. I feel like this has come up on the podcast a lot lately. I just turned 40 this year, and I look back on my 20s and it's just like, oh
Oh, me
gosh,
too.
like
Listen,
yeah.
if I could hide, like, can I hide from myself?
Yeah.
Can I? I mean, yeah, it's a deal. And I
Yeah.
do think we have to work through that, and
Yeah.
I talk about that some in this book, the process of me kind of working through some regrets.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
um, but I mean, at some point, as Melanie has said many times, this is in scripture, but at some point you got to throw off your grave clothes and walk.
Yeah.
Like, you just can't mourn what you got wrong forever.
Yeah.
And absolutely there are situations and circumstances where we have to go back maybe and try to make something right, or we have to go back and apologize. There will continue to be situations where we have to
Yeah.
apologize. But that I just don't think by and large the things that we have magnified in our heads a lot of times
Hmm.
are not necessarily as large as we make them out to be.
Yeah.
And somebody said to me one time when I was kind of walking through all that stuff, kind of dealing with some of the regret and stuff that from my 20s. And somebody said to me, like, nobody really thinks about you as much as you think they do. Nobody's like, nobody's looking at, you know, 48-year-old so and so and going, well, I know who she was when she was 17. And if they
Yeah.
are, that's not really about the 48-year-old, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought Moses's journey was good encouragement. Just uh, there is a process that we have to walk through when we're dealing with shame and regret, for sure.
Yeah.
But we get to keep walking.
Yeah. We can't go from who we were in our 20s when we knew everything to like so far the other direction that we can't show up in
Right.
the ways that he's
Right.
gifted us to be able to.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I loved how there was so much wrapped into the book about that. And also this is one that really hit me and I resonated with how, well, I'm just going to read the quote. You say
Okay.
it better
Go
than I'm
ahead.
going to. For years our church cultures have stressed that women are the caregivers, the nurturers, and the hospitality providers. For some of us this may very well be true, but it's not true for all of us. Don't mind me over here raising my hand. And
Listen,
yeah,
yeah. How about some women with some administrative gifts?
yes.
How about some women with a gift of vision? And I understand. Listen, I don't think by and large any of this is malicious, right?
Yeah.
It's just, and I love to cook for people and all that kind of stuff. But you put me in a 2-year-old nursery, and you're going to watch a very slow meltdown.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not. I can do it. You can do
Yeah.
anything for an
Yeah.
hour, but it's not going to light me up from the inside out.
Yeah.
And obviously there is like grunt work that has to go on behind the scenes in any organization.
Yeah.
But as much as we can, I feel like we want people operating in the place where they're kind of hardwired to kill it. So
Yes.
yeah, I don't know. It would be interesting. And I don't know if you've ever read Jesus and John Wayne by
I
Christian
haven't.
Cobus Dume, but and I may not have said her middle name correctly, but I think it's just Cobes. But it really shed some light for me in terms of where some of these mentalities where they came from. It's neither here nor there in the sense of like it's the expectation a lot of times.
Hmm.
And listen, if that is where somebody love how and where somebody loves to serve, you get out there and get after it,
Yeah.
but it's just we've relegated in some spaces women to these very few small tasks.
Yeah.
And I just think there's a lot more that we can offer.
Well, and I think it's almost made a lot of women, especially within that church culture, feel like there's something wrong with them if they
Oh,
don't
100. Yeah.
enjoy it. We many years ago I was a homeschooler. We were part of a homeschool co-op and I would pick the high school classes. Like yes, I had little ones at the time. I was like, "Do not put me with them." Like I love
Right.
my children. Yes, but I'm really looking forward to like when they get older and we can
Right.
have real conversations and like I this is not my sweet spot. And I had friends who that absolutely was. They feared their children becoming teenagers
Right.
because they just gloried in doing all the crafting projects and
Oh,
the
yes. It
play-doh
makes
and
me sweat. But
yeah.
but I get it though. And I was so listen, I was so grateful for those friends.
Yeah.
Uh at that point in my life because it was not
Hmm.
my gift, but I've always gravitated to high school kids.
Yeah.
That I love that age so much. And I don't think that I don't know of any church that would say, what I want to do, I really want to set out to discourage these women. I don't think
Yeah.
that's the heart behind
Yeah.
it at
Yeah.
all. I just think there is a point where you feel like there are certain boxes you can go into, and if you don't fit in those boxes, it creates this weird disconnect because it's tangled up with your faith.
Yeah.
So you feel, oh, well, I'm not being humble enough. You know what? I'm not being submissive enough. I'm not being I'm being too strong willed. Like, what is wrong with a strong willed woman? Like, it's just, it's, it's a little maddening because you kind of can't win for losing because you feel like if you
Yeah.
try to force your way out of the box, it's going to cause a deal.
Yeah.
And you feel like, if you don't fit in the box, then it's a flaw within you. You just
Mm-hmm.
need to fit in those spaces. And I don't have a great answer for how to, work through that. I know how I felt, particularly as a young mom. And mostly I felt like I was kind of terrible at it, because
Yeah.
I just didn't seem to naturally enjoy some of the things that, and listen, I had a responsibility. I understand that
Yeah.
to be a responsible parent, and I wanted to be, but it didn't look like I thought it was going to look like because I didn't get this like overwhelming sense of joy. Now, as the mom of a teenager, I was is a whole new day.
Yep.
But just that whole notion though that all my identity should come from motherhood. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's I don't buy it. I don't
Yeah.
buy it.
I don't either. And I think especially like as you're getting to this point, obviously that you're at, Alex is in college. I'm
Right.
about to send off my oldest next year to college. They go away.
They really do. It's
This
it's the
can't
craziest
be.
thing. They
Yeah.
go away. And one thing Melanie and I have said so often to one another over the last couple of years is how grateful we are that in some small way during those years as our kids were growing up, that we stayed connected to things that we loved just because we loved them,
Yeah.
not because it was part of parenting. Like we were talking the other day about how when everybody would go to bed in our houses and we would be up at 10:30, 11:30 at night writing blog posts,
Yeah.
not because anybody was making us, but
Mm-hmm.
because creatively it was so great to have something that was just ours.
Yeah.
And then as they became teenagers, we had the podcast that was just ours. And I can't recommend it enough. Like
Yeah.
staying connected to those things that you've loved for a long time that energize you in ways that maybe even your job does not, or your
Mm-hmm.
role as in your home does not. I highly recommend it. Just staying as
Yeah.
connected to it as you can.
Well, and you talk about also in the book, like not minimizing your gifts and that it's not arrogant or boastful to clearly identify them.
Yeah,
Like
it's not.
it's
And I'm the
okay.
worst at this, by the way. Like somebody asked me the other day, like, what do you do? And it is still so hard for me to say, I'm a writer. I'm a writer.
Yeah.
I don't know where or when I got into my head that that was somehow a pretentious thing to say. But no, like being able to say, I think it's helpful, honestly, to say, oh yeah, I'm good at doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And also, oh, I'm not good at doing that. Like I
Yes.
tell my husband all the time, if I had to do his job, he runs a project management office for a company, and it's all details, it's all strategy, it's all what's coming down the road, it's all planning. Like, and he's so good at it. I would curl up in a corner if I had to do that. Like, it's good for me to know I do have a few gifts. Administrative stuff is not one of them.
Yeah.
Like being a visionary is not necessarily one of them. Looking down the road, not one of them. But there are things that I am kind of hardwired to do, and I think it's good to know how you can lean in that direction. Or even if you have a job that may not seem like it on paper, it has a whole lot to do with those things, being able to find ways to pull those things into whatever you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I might not be the best. If I'm somebody's administrative assistant, I might be a little frustrating for them, but by diggity, I can go in there and I can be relational. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
build relationships with the people in that organization. I can build relationships with customers that I'm good at doing. And so
Yeah.
I think if you understand your strengths, it makes it sometimes a little easier to not be so frustrated by your weaknesses.
Yeah. And it allows other people to show up in those areas who are good at
Absolutely.
it.
Uh-huh.
It's like I think about how you guys have Retha working
Yes.
with you on the podcast, and like you can tell like what you guys are good at and then what you don't have to be good at because you
Right.
can have her do that.
Yeah. Every time I had to do a spreadsheet in my job at school where I was until a few years ago, every time I had to do a spreadsheet, I would either go to my friend Heather or my friend Brian, and I'd be like, hey, what you doing? Because they both have brains that could take that information and go, da, 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 da. And
Yep.
so when I left work, I was like, what am I going to do about the spreadsheets? Because Melanie and I use spreadsheets from time to time. Well, listen, as it turns out, my brother-in-law is a whiz at a spreadsheet. And so he just this year has taken some stuff for us. And I don't know how his brain knew how to do it, but there's no shame in going to somebody and going, you're so much better at this than I am. Can you help? And
Yeah.
then listen, do you need some copy for something?
Yeah.
Can I can I write up a biography for you? Like
Yeah.
whatever. But I just think it's that whole notion of all our gifts are meant to work together.
Yeah.
So I don't know what yours are.
Yeah. I love that you can see that playing out for you guys, and even in the ways that it came up in Exodus. Like, I love that obviously it's a story about Moses, and we hear a lot about Moses and the Israelites, but then you pointed out all these women who had such big roles, and they were fulfilling roles that other people weren't able to fulfill.
Yeah.
And that was so inspiring. I mean, we've heard the stories a zillion times before, but like taking it that deeper place where you're going into Miriam and the Pharaoh's daughter and all of that.
Yeah. I mean, the whole notion that there were five women before Moses was even born. Two midwives named Shiphrah and Puah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then his mom, whose name is Jochebed, and then Miriam, his sister, and then Pharaoh's daughter. These five women were instrumental in preserving his life.
yeah,
The first two, the midwives, because they defied Pharaoh's orders to kill the male Hebrew babies when they were born, and then you after Pharaoh, then says, well, okay, well then what we're going to do is we're going to throw all the male babies in the Nile. But you had his mother who saw that he was a fine baby. You had his sister who, when his mother put him in the river, she stood back to watch.
yep,
And then she saw Pharaoh's daughter see him. Like these three women who saw, and Scripture very specifically points out that they saw, then worked together to save his life. So that and then as soon as Moses grows up, the first thing Scripture tells us he does is that he walked outside and he saw a Hebrew fighting an Egyptian. And the difference is that all three of those women before him used their sight redemptively, and he did not. And
mm-hmm,
so he used his sight to justify his anger and to kill somebody. And then he spends the next 4 years in this self imposed exile because he knows that somebody saw him do it. So
yeah,
you get this, like, right in Exodus 2, you've got healthy sight, healthy leadership, unhealthy sight, unhealthy leadership. Moses works it out, but it takes some time, and he doesn't get it all worked out, which is interesting to me. Before God appears to him with the burning bush, he still doesn't want to use his voice,
yeah,
even when God calls him. But the reason God calls him is because when Moses sees the burning bush, he turns aside to see. So there's this whole idea there that if we want to be people who lead, we've got to be noticers. We've
mm-hmm,
got to be seers. We've got to be people who are not so immersed in ourselves or our mistakes or our circumstances that we miss what's going on around us. And I think that is fascinating.
yeah. I loved all the ways that you pointed out, and would have never probably noticed on my own how many times it talks about seeing in that book, but it's all over the
It's
place.
all over the place. I'm telling you, the day when I first noticed all the seeing, and I tell this story in the book, but I was on a
Yeah.
flight to Houston, and I really did. I don't have a Bible beside me, but I would show you. I walked into my friend Marion's house, like with Exodus, like, look at this. It just blew my mind, and I know it's been there forever. I know that was not new information. I had just never noticed it before.
Yeah.
But I love a pattern. Uh, I love picking up on something that was already there and for whatever reason had just not been clear to me before. And so it was really interesting to see how sight was so integral to Moses's life all the way until his death.
Yeah. And how it even points out that like his sight was still strong
Yeah,
at the
his
end of his
vision was unhindered at the end of
life.
his life. And I think when I read that, which was the second day I was at Marion's house, I think I got up and just walked around and clapped. Like, well done, God.
Yeah.
Well done. Like you pulled that sucker around full
Yeah.
circle. I mean, and I had just never
Yeah.
noticed it.
Yeah. It was so good. There are so many things in this book. I mean, 58 different highlights. Like, there's just so much that we could latch onto and we could talk about today. But I think the thing that I want to it up with, other than people should just go get the book right now, is can we talk about the leadership of the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders?
Listen, I, I I can't tell you. Last night I was watching TikTok as I do every night before I go to sleep, and Reese's husband is doing TikToks now
Okay.
about what he's cooking for her when she comes home from practice. I'll tell you, last night they had Kodiak blueberry pancakes. Uh, he made some eggs. He scrambled some eggs and he cooked her some. I can't remember. I think he cooked some turkey bacon. I don't know why I am so fascinated by this organization. Now,
Yeah.
I will say, with this newest season on Netflix, there were some spots where I got a little feisty because I thought, oh no, y'all need to do better by these young women.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, better. We
Can
need
one
we
of
need to
them,
pay.
I'm just curious, is one of them the tour guide?
Oh yes, the tour guide. That just
Oh,
let's keep them in situations where they don't have to worry,
yes.
but and where they're not objectified. That'd be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
I just think too, also pay them a fair wage. This is
Yes.
not a sustainable way to live where you have to work all day at a full-time job and then go to practice. When Reese was eating her pancakes last night, it was after 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. But I do. So I appreciate the tradition of it. I appreciate how hard they work at it. I appreciate the excellence of that organization. I do have some points I wouldn't mind making if I could sit down with somebody.
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting because so much of, I mean, obviously, these women who are leading this organization have been doing it for a really long time
Absolutely.
through a very big transition in our culture from what it was in the 70s and
100%.
80s to now we have got Gen Z who are in
Yeah.
there having a very different upbringing and very different
Yes.
priorities over bodies and like all of that kind of thing.
Oh, and listen, if our Gen Z friends don't know anything else, right? They know they can advocate for themselves.
Yes.
And they know how to advocate for themselves in ways that I would have never had the courage to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mentioned this at some point. Melanie and I were recording something, I don't know, but like sometimes, we can get in this mindset where we think, well, this is how it's always been. And I don't know
Hmm.
why everything has to change. Well, sometimes they might have been a little bit of garbage to begin with.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there may be some stuff that we could do better now that we know better.
Yeah.
So that would be
And
one of the things I might want to bring up. Yeah.
and I think we see that in that leadership they're like trying to
Yeah,
change.
they
But then
do.
there's
And
there's some
yeah,
big glaring things that you're like, I'm going to be really curious over the next few years, especially if this leadership at some point it's going to have to change hands.
yeah,
And what will happen at that point and what it
yeah,
will look like.
yeah. Uh-huh. I agree with you. I think that, on one hand, I get that they have built an organization that is iconic.
Yeah.
And obviously they feel protective of it,
Yeah.
right? But we don't talk to young women in the same way now that we did like when I was growing up.
Hmm.
So we don't comment about some things. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
so it's
The
interesting.
weigh-ins and the this hair color is not what you're going to
Yeah.
have. And like it was, yeah, it was interesting.
But I also know to some degree, I think people are familiar with how this goes. They probably wouldn't sign up for it unless they were
Yes,
like,
that's
okay,
true.
trade off. I can deal with that if I get to do this,
Yeah.
which that's fine. But I really do feel like they need to pay them more. I feel like they could do a lot
Yeah.
more for them career wise, just vocationally,
Mm-hmm.
than just say like we need you to be here in full hair and makeup, which that's for the birds, every night at 6:30 or whatever, and then we're just going to stay until 10, and then you get to get up and go to work the next morning.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that hopefully like it coming to a bigger light, like maybe the people will start to question that and they'll feel that pressure a little bit more
Yeah.
because they are such an iconic organization. They're doing a ton for that company
Yes.
and and they they need to honor that, and it's not the 70s where these girls are like,
Right.
I'm just happy to be on the team. Like, no, that's not enough. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we are bringing things to a close, would you tell us what a typical day looks like for you?
I don't know how typical my days are because well, I'll tell you this. I tend to try to concentrate. Like Melanie and I always record on Mondays. I usually edit on Tuesdays or Wednesdays. And then I like when I was writing the book, I tried to keep my Thursdays free and clear and my Fridays free and clear so that there was a little bit more dedicated time, to write. Now, when travel gets mixed up in that, it's not typical at all. So, but I do, I do get to do everything I do from home, which feels like a total gift. Because for so long I got up and I was at school by
Yeah.
7:10 in the morning. So it is really nice to be at home. I try, 3 or 4 times a week when I'm in town. I like to go to Pilates classes. I like to go in the morning as opposed to in the afternoon. Uh, but best case scenario, maybe I cook dinner late in the afternoon, but probably not. I don't cook as much as I used to at all. But mostly I just try to keep my work week kind of stacked on the front end and a little bit more open on the back end so that like Thursdays and Fridays I can do stuff like this. And I
Yeah.
don't feel like I'm in some way taking away time from the stuff that I have to get done.
Yeah.
So, but by and large, it's pretty breezy. I mean, I don't know. It's not super structured. I do try to wake up at a decent hour in the mornings just because I hate that feeling that I've, you know, let the day get away from me.
Yeah.
But sometimes I don't mind actually sleeping in
Yeah.
a little bit,
Yeah. I
not a
know.
bad deal.
I hosted a morning show all throughout this summer just as like accountability to get myself up and going.
Wow.
But these last couple of weeks I was like, all right, I've paid my dues all summer like before we get back to school and I'm having to take people everywhere in the morning like I'm going to like just a little. Just leave
Just
it
a
a
little.
little. Yeah.
Just like 8. Just
Yes,
maybe
yes.
8. Uh-huh.
Between 7 and 8, I can
Yeah.
I can allow myself that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's actually it's nice every once in a while to give yourself a break as
Yeah.
much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, what's one little thing that you do to live well anyway?
Honestly, at this stage in my life, I'm gonna tell you, I love a nap. I
Yeah.
love a nap. I don't even I mean, I'll even take it back. I'll use kindergarten terms and I'll say rest time. I don't care if I sleep, but in the afternoons, I really love to just like stretch out. Uh Maybe I'm reading something. Maybe I'm just going to watch TikTok. Maybe I'm going to catch up on my news app. I don't know. But I love taking time in the afternoons to rest. I know saying that is a huge luxury. That was not the story of my life for the first 25 years or so of my working life. But man, I love it now. And our dog is so conditioned to it that I'll say, and I always do my rest time in the guest room. So I'll say, Hazel, you want to go in the guest room? And like she just runs in there. She loves to get up on the bed. It's her best life.
Yeah.
So, and it really does make a difference. Like it just gives me a chance in the middle of the day to kind of reset my brain and also
Mhm.
reset my pace a little bit. If
Yeah.
I'm feeling
Yep.
stressed or if I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, like I've got so much to do, I am not one of those people. I don't I'm not one of those people who can take on a whole lot and say, actually, I work my best that way. I don't work my best that way. So it's a good reset for me. And I
Yeah.
don't do it every day, but I bet I do it at least 3 days a week for sure.
Yeah. Have a little siesta.
A
Take
little
that
siesta.
pause. Yeah.
Yes.
I find that too. I get that like around 2 o'clock. And it's like,
Yes.
I'm out of energy. Like, I need some sort of little break recharge before I can, like, okay, get back up and back into
Yeah.
it.
And it doesn't have to be sleep. It's being
Yeah.
able to turn your brain off for a second, I
Yeah.
think is really helpful.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I
I
like
like it.
I've never done that until like the last year and a half. And I thought, well, it's a good thing I didn't know about this when I was working. I'd have
Yeah.
felt deprived. I'd
Yeah.
have felt cheated.
I'm upset.
Uh-huh. I'd have been
I
going
love
out to my
that.
car during my planning
Yeah.
period, taking
Right.
a little nappy nap.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
You're like, I got to get more darkened windows.
I
It's hot.
know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I know when I have to drive my daughters to ballet and it's in the winter and so it's dark by, like
Yes.
4:30 and I have to it'll be one of those classes where they're only there for an hour. It's not enough time for me to head back home. And when it does get dark early, I'm like, I don't think anybody could see me in here. Like,
No,
I
I'm
think I
just
could
gonna
take a
close
little
my
nap.
eyes.
Yep.
I'm just gonna close my eyes. Sometimes it's the nicest thing we can do for ourselves,
Yeah.
honestly. I Those practice times when Alex was in junior high, high school, and he would have like sports practice or play practice or whatever, those were some good recharging moments.
Yeah.
There were a lot of nights I would take my computer and I would sit in my car and I would write. I mean, I wasn't
Mhm.
online, but I could still write.
Yeah.
And that's a good little window of time to seize for however you need it,
Yep.
whether
Yeah.
you want to read or rest or create or whatever. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it was the business.
I've been known to edit a podcast or some
Yes,
voiceover work because I'm just like, I'm in there. I'm in this little mini office.
that's exactly
Yep.
right.
Yep.
Mhm.
All right, Sophie, are you ready for my stock questions?
I am.
Okay. Candles or essential oil diffuser?
Candles,
All right. Cloth napkins or paper?
paper,
City or country?
city,
Okay. Paper or digital?
digital,
Shopping, would you rather do it online or in the store?
online.
Yeah. There's just not many options in the store even anymore.
I mean, it's fine every once in a while, but you can't shop in the store in your pajamas by and large.
That's true.
I mean,
Yes.
I like the whole contrast between here I am in my pajamas and my hair's in a chip clip and I don't have shoes on, but listen, I am really perusing some of your more beautiful items
Yes.
from the privacy of my den.
And you
Oh
do a
no,
good job of like
thank you.
curating those things. It's
Thank
impressive.
you.
I gotta
Thank you.
say. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. It's whatever time you're making dinner and you need a mental break. Do you listen to a podcast or music?
Music.
And what would be the music you'd listen to?
I have I have channels saved, or not channels, but playlists saved for this specific purpose. It depends on my mood. I love yacht rock. Like, I'm so sorry. Um, so if it's the summertime, I'm going to go for a yacht rock playlist. That's a good time. I also really like jazz. My husband doesn't like it as much. So I have this piano jazz playlist that sometimes, if I've got to chop a lot of things, I really like. And then sometimes, if I'm feeling a little more spirited, or like if we're going to have company over, um, we use Apple Music and they put together a playlist every week that's called the Get Up playlist, and it's all super upbeat. I listen to the Get Up playlist just because it's kind of happy and you can kind of makes you feel like you want to dance a little bit. But I really do love to listen to music when I cook. Now, interestingly, or maybe not interestingly, maybe this is just a fact. If I'm doing something like closet clean out, I don't want to listen to music. I want a podcast.
Okay.
Uh, if it's more of a chore, I want a podcast. I want to get lost in a story
Yeah.
or in somebody else's voices. But if it's creative, I want music. So
Interesting. That's a good delineation. I haven't heard anybody else say that yet before. But so if you were cleaning out the closet and you were listening to a podcast, which podcast would you be listening to?
oh gosh, I mean, I have my favorites. I love my friends Jamie and Knox's podcast, which is called the Popcast with Knox
Yeah.
and Jamie. And I listen to that all the time. But right now, I'll tell you what I'm loving right now is the Holy Post. I'm really into the Holy Post with Phil Vischer and Sky Jatani
Okay.
because they talk a lot about current events. They talk a lot about those current events from a perspective that's rooted in the Bible, but uh it's not political is the best way I know
Hmm.
how to say it.
Yeah.
And they just have really interesting guests, and they talk to each other for half the show, and then there'll be a guest for the last half of the show. And I always feel like I like to learn things, and I always feel like at the end of one of their shows, I've learned something or I understand a different point of view with more compassion. And
Hmm.
so they did several weeks ago, they did a podcast episode where they talked, and I've talked about this on our podcast, where they talked about foreground decisions and background decisions.
I was going to ask you about this
Oh
because
my
I heard you
gosh.
like throw it out there and I was like, wait, where did this come from? I need more
Oh,
information.
listen, it was Scott Chitani was talking about it, about a sociologist who came up with this theory. And I cannot tell you how much it may be trending past unreasonable hospitality in terms of the subject I'm going to find a way to bring up in conversation. Uh, so interesting about how there are just certain things we made up our minds about a long time ago. Those
Mm.
decisions live in the background. We don't like to interfere with those decisions because it's disruptive. And
Mm-hmm.
especially when we're overwhelmed, it's just easier to go with that. So we
Mm-hmm.
will make really low information decisions or sometimes even impulsive decisions when something comes into the foreground that we need to settle. We'll rely on that background information instead of thinking it through. I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
I've really loved the Holy Post lately. It's been a good way to kind of stay engaged with current events without my blood pressure going up. And then I also really like to listen to the Daily, the New York Times podcast, which is
Hmm.
just because I don't watch the news really much
Mm-hmm.
at all. I try to read the news. And I'll listen to the Daily if something big has happened just to kind of get a good little synopsis of what's going on.
Yeah, that's a great little curation of podcasts. I like it.
Thank you.
Okay, chocolate, milk or dark?
Dark.
Okay. Sports or no sports?
For sure, sports,
Yeah,
all the
that's a
sports,
silly
many
one to even
many many
ask.
many sports. Yeah.
Yes. Live broadcasting, would you rather broadcast or watch?
I don't know. I think maybe I would rather watch. I think maybe ideally I could be behind the scenes. Like I
Hmm.
love watching something like that happen in the moment, and feeling like you're a part of something like that, but I don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to be the one on camera.
Okay. What is your favorite movie?
Oh golly. I don't know. I haven't
It's
thought
a
about
hard
that in
one.
such a long time. I would say probably the original Color Purple,
Oh, that's a great
the one
one.
from the 80s.
Yeah.
I really, really, really love that movie.
Yeah. That is so well done. Should
Yeah.
have deserved all the awards that it was up for that it didn't get. But yeah, that's a great one. Okay, and final question. If you were to put yourself on the crunchiness spectrum, where 0 is totally not crunchy and 10 is like singing Kumbaya by the fire with your legs unshaven and dreadlocks in your hair,
Sure. Sure.
where are you on the spectrum?
Higher than you would think. Probably a 7.
Okay.
Probably a 7.
All right.
I got a look. I got a good bit of crunchy in me,
I like it.
and I'll tell you where I attribute it. My mama, when I was a little girl, and I write about this in the book too, I got real into yoga and calisthenics
Oh, yeah.
in the 70s. And I think too, because I grew up in the 70s, I don't know. I am a little kumbaya-ish. I'm gonna shave my legs. Please
Yeah.
don't misunderstand. I mean, you know, power to anybody who doesn't. Listen, I bless your efforts.
Yeah.
But I am more comfortable with that kind of vibe than I am with something like super rigid.
Okay. Well, that's a great answer. And it was so fun to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I love being with you. I'm sorry about my voice, but we
Oh,
did
you know
it.
what? It seems like it really kind of cleared up throughout the course
It
of the
did get
show.
better.
Yeah.
This happened
Yeah.
to me one time before. Melanie and I were having somebody on, and it got better and better the more I talked. So maybe that's a good lesson to me.
Yeah. Which isn't a misnomer because they always say, rest your
I know.
voice.
Rest your
But
voice.
I guess you just need to warm it up.
I maybe so.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking to you.
Yeah. It was a great time having you on. Everybody's got to get this book. It's up there with me for unreasonable hospitality. So
Thank
we
you
got to
so
go get it.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Yep. Bye.
Bye, MacKenzie.